This is Bill Corter with one question for today's presentation. Have you ever read Wayne Dyer? And I realize that's an unusual question, especially when discussing the toxins of the world and the toxicity of the world. But Wayne Dyer really stood for fighting the toxicity of the world in a variety of areas. And so I did want to ask if you have read it, and have you ever considered reading one of his books? For those of you who do not know Wayne Dyer, he's an individual who has published around 30 nonfiction books and has lectured across the country. He died recently, and he was ranked, I think, the 7th or 8th most influential spiritual leader on the country or in the world. But he was both focusing on material things that are practical in life, plus the spiritual. Now, I know I'm running against the odds when bringing up the suggestion to read a book. This country has 25,000 bookstores, and that number has been dropping decade after decade. I also realize that most of us, including myself, buy books through Amazon.com. Most of my reading comes through what I buy online. Nevertheless, statistics show that for the average person, they read one nonfiction book after they graduate, and only one over the course of their life. And that could be from graduating from college, it could be from graduating from graduate school, it could even be just from graduating from high school. People don't read many nonfiction books. My recommendation is to read one Wayne Dyer book. Now, I'm not going to go through and discuss all of his different titles. It's easy to look up on Expedia. It's easy to look up on Amazon.com. But I'm going to try to recommend him through 3 short stories and see if these stories kind of grab your interest in the man. When Wayne Dyer was a teacher, he decided to write Erroneous Zones. This was a short book that focused on taking control of your life. He wrote the book, got it published, was delighted. No one bought it. Absolutely no one. What would most of us do in that circumstance? We probably would give up. What did Wayne Dyer do? He went out, spent all the money he had, and he bought every single copy that had been printed, right from the publisher. And then he loaded his station wagon with all of the books, barely giving him room to drive, and he took off on a 1-year trip. And what he did is he drove around the United States, city by city, town by town. And this was in 1976 when he wrote Erroneous Zones, so this is pre-internet. And he did everything manually. And what he did was establish his own little pattern, his own little ritual. He would go into a little town, let's say it was in New Jersey, and he would look for the local radio station. Radio stations are always looking for people who are willing to be interviewed in the middle of the night. That's their dead zone. They would love to have someone come in and say, yes, please interview me. And that's what he did. For radio station after radio station, in the middle of the night, sometimes 4 a.m., 5 a.m., he would go in, and for an hour, he would talk about his book. And then what he would do in the morning, he would look up and find a local bookstore in that town. If it had 2 bookstores, even better. And then he would call the bookstore, pretending to be somebody else, and say, listen, I just heard Wayne Dyer on the radio. Nice interview. Seemed very interesting. And he has this new book out. Do you have it? Well, of course the bookstore didn't have it. Wayne Dyer had all the books. So he did that 2 or 3 times in the morning, and then his next ritual, in the afternoon, he would go to the bookstore himself, or bookstores, again, if they had 2 bookstores in the town, and he would introduce himself and say, listen, I'm Wayne Dyer. I was just on the radio the other day conducting an interview. Do you have any interest in my book? Well, of course they had an interest in his book, because several people had called asking for it just a few hours earlier. So then he would give them 4, 5, 6, 7 copies of his book and drive off to the next town and repeat the process. It took him 1 year of living out of his car, 1 year of traveling to almost every city in the United States, and at the end of that year, it was a bestseller. And to this point, it has sold 35 million copies. So, if nothing else, you have to respect the perseverance of someone like that, and someone with that level of perseverance can teach you a lot. Second story, another true story. He was walking his neighborhood one night, and he came across this man who was searching for his lost car keys. The man had dropped them, and the man was searching underneath a lamppost. And so Wayne, being the nice individual and giving individual that he is, he stopped to try to help the man. And they looked in the grass and the dirt and the bushes right by the lamppost. And after about 10 minutes, Wayne turned to this other individual and said, "You know, is there any chance you might have dropped it over there, you know, in the darkened area in the other side of the grass?" And the guy turned to him and said, "Oh yeah, that's exactly where I dropped it." And Wayne, confused, said, "Well, then why are you looking over here?" And the guy said, pointing to the lamppost, "Well, it's light over here, it's dark over there." And Wayne Dyer had the habit of coercing the reader and the audience to move away from the light and look towards the dark. Look towards the unknown. Look towards things that were neglected and not paid sufficient attention to. And that's the style in all of his writing. He gets you to look at things that you're not currently looking at and things that will help improve your life. The third story is that the most important day in Wayne Dyer's life was August 30th. He was born and raised back east, but his father left him at a very early age. And so Wayne Dyer grew up in orphanage. But he searched for his father through his childhood, his adolescence, and into his early adulthood. There were times in his life that he thought he caught a glimpse of his father coming to take a peek at how he was doing. At least that part was relayed by his two older brothers who thought they had spotted him at a distance. So Wayne Dyer was absolutely committed to tracking down his father, and he finally did, and he did it on August 30th. But he didn't find his father, he found his father's grave. And so he stood on that grave ready to release all his anger, his resentment, his frustration that he'd carried for decades. And when he stood on top of the grave and looked at the headstone, that anger lifted and disappeared. And what came in its place was forgiveness and love. And so he did talk to his father standing on his grave, telling his father how much he loved him, missed him, but appreciated him. And he thanked his father for being part of the process that brought him to life and gave him the chance to experience this miracle of life. And from that day, August 30th, Wayne Dyer went home and in 12 days wrote Erroneous Zones. Again, a book that sold 35 million copies. Now, Wayne Dyer died on August 30th. Was that a coincidence? Wayne Dyer would say no. Life is about destiny. But Wayne Dyer believed that you could control your destiny. You just needed to be aware of the factors around it that influence your destiny. And many of his books focus on changing your destiny and making it better. So with those three stories, I hope you get a feeling of the character of the man. And I hope those three stories give you a little bit of interest in the man, sufficient enough that you would make an attempt to just buy one of his books. Again, to conclude, that would be the habit. Read one of Wayne Dyer's books. I think if you do, it will give you enough of an interest to read more than one. But for this habit, I'd be very satisfied if you just read one. Thank you for listening. Thank you for considering Wayne Dyer. And on his behalf, let's all keep growing and let's change our destinies. Thank you.